An interview with Albert in McMahan, who flew with the 306 bomb group
Correct.
of the 8th Air Force. And Mac, you want to start this off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I was born just across the Alabama-Georgia state line at a place called Ranburne, Alabama, on September 1920. And my father, at the time, was a farmer, a sawmiller, and because that was about all that was available in that area and for that level of education at that particular time. Although my father and my mother both had above average educations for that time. My father had completed the 8th grade, my mother completed the 8th grade, and both of them were very educated for the time. In fact, my father wound up being a school principal, and my mother never taught her anything like that. And she and my father both always insisted that we kids speak good English. It was unacceptable to say anything that was slang or something like that. As a consequence, we 7 children, of which I'm the oldest, never had nicknames or anything like that. It was always a correct, proper name. They insisted on it. And we always insisted on that happening after we got to be adults, up to a point in time. And then when you get to be adults and you're associated with too many people, there's just no way that you can insist they give you your first name. For example, I'm called Al. I used to be called by some people Red because I had red hair. And as I grew up, as I said, my father was a farmer. I grew up on a farm, cotton, corn, and subsistence kind of crops. But when I graduated from high school at age 16, I was too young to do anything else, and my father didn't have the money to send me to college, so I went back to high school for an additional year and took the kinds of courses that I wanted to take and couldn't take. At the time, I was in a regular class. Then a year later, I went to Auburn, or Alabama Polytechnic Institute at that time, and I was majoring in agricultural science, and I was there for 1 year. At the end of 1 year, my father said, "Son, I don't have enough money to keep you in college any longer. You're going to have a job to stay." Well, this was 1940, 39, 40, and there was no jobs available. I tried at the college level there for jobs on the campus or on the farms, and if I'd have been a sophomore, I might have already a sophomore getting into as junior, I probably would have been able to get a job, but there was no jobs available for just a graduating freshman who didn't make above average grades because they were having too good a time, enjoying campus life too much. So I said, well, what can I do? And after looking around at what my hobbies were, and I got some literature from the Army Tank Corps, and that said we have a communications equipment in every tank, and somebody has to repair, you know, and you have the possibility of going to the Fort Monmouth, New Jersey Communications School, which at that time was one of the premier schools for communications in the world. And I looked at that and I said, wow, since my hobby is radio and electricity, that'd be a perfect thing for me to do. So I went down to Fort McClellan to enlist, and I went up to the recruiter and said, I want to enlist to go to the Army Tank Corps. He said, oh great, no problem whatsoever, you're in. Well, I got sworn in, held up my hand and said, I do. And after I'd done that, the recruiter came over and put his finger on my shoulder and says, guess where you're going? And I said, I don't know, someplace where they have tanks. And he said, no, you're going to the Army Air Corps. So, you know, I got a little bit irritated, and the recruiting officer came over and said, you've been to college for 1 year, and the Army Air Corps gets all people who've been to college, so you're going to Maxwell Field, Montgomery, Alabama, which I did. And then after, that was in July, and then beginning in January, I guess it was, no, sometime earlier than that, I went to A&E school up in Kansas City, Missouri, to a contract school. Graduated from there with very good grades. And so after I got out, I began to crew airplanes, first a BT-13 and then AT-6, and I got exposed then to some B-18 bombers and B-10 bombers. That was the kind of things they had at that time, and I got exposed to those as well. And they started a new base down at Auburn, Georgia, and I was one of the cadre of people who went down there and helped open up the base. And when we got there, all the barracks and everything were finished, but the runways were still being worked on, and the way they made the runways was very, very interesting to me. They went in and they rototilled the soil, this red clay, which I'm sure they moved a lot of it on there, very good, and then they put cement in with it and sprayed it with water and packed it down, and when it hardened, that was the runway. And that was the original runways at Turner Field down in Auburn, Georgia. Well, I was worked up, and I was a flight chief of AT-6s, and I recall I had 6 of them, and then they brought in a new airplane, the AT-9, which was a twin-engine, all-metal, all-electric trainer. And I was, since I was interested in electricity and instruments and things like that, they said, okay, you're the #1 guy on this. So I started in as #1 on the AT-9, and ultimately wound up with a flight of, as I recall, 6 of them. I was the flight chief. It was a great little airplane, but it had a lot of teething troubles initially, which we worked on. But then one day there was a notice put on the bulletin board about an instrument specialist to go to the 301st Bomb Group. And gee, that really set me off, because I knew they were going overseas, and I wanted to go overseas. And so I went in to saw my squadron commander, Captain Foster. And Captain Foster ushered me out the door with no uncertain words. And I managed to bother him at least once a day, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, about filling that request. And finally he said, oh, get the hell out of here, you can go. And so I joined the, not the 301st, but the 306, because the orders had been changed, at, I think it was either Richmond or Roanoke, Virginia, just for no airplanes or anything like that, just to get us all together and to begin our indoctrination and shots and all that for prior to going overseas. Well, after some time, we were shipped up to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and did more shots and got qualified on the rifle, bit of marching, and things of that nature, and issued some heavy clothing for winter time. Then on the 31st day of August of '42, we got on board the Queen Elizabeth in New York Harbor, and the next morning we took off and proceeded to Gourock, Scotland, and we zigzagged all the way across, totally unescorted. We got off the Queen Elizabeth, and the first morning boarded the train, and we're going to go from there down to Thurlow, which is some distance down. And the meal that they fed us was something I'd never heard of before. They had dark toast, which was very common in England at the time and all through the war. It had baked beans on top of it, with a strip of bacon, and a cup of tea. That was breakfast, which was very amusing to all of us. We sort of said, is this what we're going to be into? And we didn't have any idea if it would actually be true or not. And that was the only time during all my tour in England that I got that. But we took a train and went through Edinburgh, Scotland, down to Thurlow, or actually to Bedford, and there the trucks picked us up and carried us out to Thurlow, our base, which was an RAF base that had been occupied, I understand, by Polish soldiers, or Polish airmen before then. Our planes arrived, we arrived at Gourock on the 5th day of September. Our combat crews, air crews, and the planes arrived on the 11th day of September, and immediately went into a whole lot of training, getting ready for combat. And the training, first of all, was composed of getting used to the area so that whenever they were flying around up there, they could spot where our base, their line was, and get there. And then they started formation flying. And of course, I wasn't involved in that at all. I was involved in ground crew, aircraft instrument specialist, loading oxygen into planes, working as a mechanic on the planes, whatever had to be done. And our first mission was on the 9th day of October of 1943. That was the first major raid that the 8th Air Force made. And there were some 4 or 5 bomb groups, I can't recall which, who made this mission. But I think there were 108 planes total who were comprised of the 8th Air Force at that time. No fighters, no nothing. And we went and the crews all flew, and on the very first mission, the 306 lost 1 crew, Captain Adams' crew, and they were all made POWs. I don't recall if any of them were killed or not. And I can remember the name of the guy who said he was the first Pigeon, because he was captured very shortly. Al Lachas. Excuse me. And they lost that 1 plane on that trip, and a number of other planes got badly shot up because the Germans were throwing everything they had at them. And they were making tail attacks by and large. And at that date, the formations that they were flying, I've been told it was 3 in trail, and someone else told me it was 3 and 3 abreast, and they just proceeded on down the target. It didn't have this big box formation that came in later. And
Mac, what was the target?
the target was Rouen, R-O-U-E, in France. And then the bomb group made 10 missions, and they lost several planes. And for example, the crew that I ultimately joined lost 2 tail gunners, and because a tail attack was the favored German attack at that time. They came in from the tail, and they shot up this tail of this plane I ultimately wound up on, and hit the tail gunner. He then shot down the German fighter that hit him, and he never flew again. And he was a very promising semi-pro baseball player, still alive, lives in Hoover, Alabama. Well, they got a replacement tail gunner, and he flew 2 or 3 missions, and the patch they put on for that 20 millimeters entry into the tail, the 20 millimeter came right through it and got the second tail gunner, and it got in the insides of his legs and down in the calves of his legs. Well, in the meantime, while some of this was happening, they were losing crews and men, and they said, we got to have replacements for these people. And they asked for anybody who wanted to get on the combat crew. Well, another guy died, Glenn Wiley, who was from California, and I both started watching these crews from the very first mission and saying, how are they doing? You know, are they smoking, drinking, nervous, whatever? Well, and we said, could we do this? Well, one day, almost simultaneously, we said, we can find out. Volunteer for combat crew and find out how good we are. So both of us volunteered. I went to a 9-day gunnery class a course down in Bovington, Virginia, and Bovington, England, and they taught us to rip, strip, reassemble 50 calibers, adjust it, and all that. The theory of pursuit curve, aircraft identification is supposed to be able to identify either friendly or foe and what type at 1/125th of a second. And we all got fairly good at that. And I think that we fired a 50 caliber on the ground, but I never recall firing a 50 caliber in the air until my first mission, which was on the 20th day of December of 1942. And that mission was to Romilly, France, Romilly-sur-Seine on the Seine River. And I don't recall how many planes were on that mission, but you know, probably less than 100. And when we came into the French coast, we could see the German fighters sitting way up above us waiting for us to come in. And they came right in, and we were under solid attack for 1 hour and 53 minutes. And of course we went in to bomb the airfield at Romilly, which we did. Got fairly good results. And about 10 minutes after we got out of, after dropping the bombs, we got hit, and hit very seriously. But they had just, the Germans had switched around to nose attacks. And they knocked out one engine, the co-pilot's control column was all banged up, and still usable, but with difficulty. Some of the 20 millimeters got into another one of the engines, which is still operating, and smoke came out of it, and oil kept pouring off the back of the wing in big globs. And of course that was a serious problem. And some of the 20 millimeters came on across the top of the wing and hit the horizontal stabilizer and damaged it very badly, and it was flopping up and down. And you know, I thought when all this happened that here goes the third tail gunner. And the pilot and the co-pilot, because of that vibration of the tail back there, put their knees up against the control column and their hands against the wheels and pulled back, and when they landed, both of them had bloody knees and bloody hands. That's how difficult it was to control. But the pilot was one of these individuals, if a plane would stay in the air and keep flying, he was going to go home. That was Lieutenant Robert P. Riordan, who stayed in and did a second tour of missions and ultimately got in 52 missions. Wound up as the squadron commander. Also was assigned to the Pentagon subsequent to the war. And I found out some of these things afterwards, many years afterwards, because I didn't see a single member of my crew from the day that I finished my last mission, 2 days after I finished my last mission, until 1993. But I've skipped over some things. During that time period, we didn't know how to prepare our equipment. We didn't have the proper equipment. For example, there was no such thing as a heated suit at that particular time. We just put on lots of clothes and the fur-lined sheepskin pants and jackets and fur-lined boots and everything we could to stay warm. But there was no way to really keep warm when you were either in the waist or back in the tail, or the ball drain was a difficult place to stay warm too. Well, we had all kinds of troubles. A lot of it was prior to my first mission, because I didn't fly until the 11th mission that the group made. But still, we lacked proper equipment. We didn't know what to do. Guns would freeze up. All kinds of troubles. Well, on my first mission, as I said, they shot the plane up pretty badly. And then after that, one more time we got shot up. Beginning on the 13th day of January 1943, my squadron went for 41 missions and didn't lose a single plane, and only one person, one of the enlisted men on the crew, while the rest of the group was losing 39 17s. And I consider myself to be one of the luckiest people on 2 feet. But on my, you know, we got a lot of opposition along the way, but it was sort of sporadic, and they were always picking on some other squadron or some other group. And as I said, I was just lucky. Well, on my last, my pilot finished his tour on my 19th mission. So I had to begin substituting with other crews for the remainder of my tour. And so I flew with experienced pilots on a couple of them, but finally on my last mission, it was a relatively new pilot and a relatively new crew. It was sort of a put together, patched up crew. And we went to Hulls, Germany. That was the briefed target for us. Well, the plane I was in, we were at altitude, I want to say 23,000 feet, just entering Germany when one engine ran away, and the prop was feathered. And then another one on the same side gave trouble and had to be feathered. And the pilot says, prepare to bail out. Well, I wasn't ready to quit. So I said, no way, I'm not going to bail out and eat sauerkraut and wieners for the rest of the war. Those are my exact words. I remember them just as well as if I had said them a few minutes ago. Well, the pilot then says, you're not going to bail out? I said, no, and he said to the crew, well, what do we want to do? Well, the top turret gunner and one of the waist gunners were on their 12th mission, and they both said, I'm with Red. Let's try to go home. He said, well, you asked for it. And the round robin on the intercom, everybody agreed with that. He points the nose down, and supposedly, I'm in the tail now, remember this, and this is all hearsay, we went down at 325 miles an hour from about 20-something thousand feet and leveled off at about 150 feet altitude. And at that point, we were having trouble anyway because two engines are out on one side and the airplane was cocked way up to keep from having big troubles. And we came out between Leland and Terschling, two islands which I'm sure you can probably remember half. And we were coming out at about 120 feet part of the time. And the flank guns from the towers were shooting us at us horizontally rather than way up in the air. So they blew out, the concussion blew out one life raft, and it draped over the horizontal stabilizer. Can't recall which one. And so we were in very, very big trouble at that point in time. So we started throwing everything out that we could throw our hands out, get our hands on. So we threw everything out, and they wiggled the airplane around a bit, and the life raft managed to work off the horizontal stabilizer. And we reached our base long after all the other crews had gone on to the target at Hulls and turned around and came back. One thing that most people experienced while they were over there was they got acquainted with someone in England because the English were very friendly to us and more or less adopted a family, and the family more or less adopted us. Well, there was a taxi driver, and we called him Pop Fuller, who drove a taxi out of Bedford to Third Line. And he liked us so well, the 369th Bomb Squadron people we'd call Fightin' Bitin'. And he liked us so well that he would come out, and if he didn't have Fightin' Bitin' people, he'd just drive all the way without even having any passengers at all. Well, someone called Pop Fuller and told him that on my last mission I didn't make it. So then when I came in, they called, and said, hey, you made it. He came out to pick me up. And after I'd gotten all painted up with a 25, which I have here a picture of, with the 25 on my chest and the 25 on my back, he picked me up and took me to the phone and I don't recall where it was. I think it was the post office you had to go to make a phone call. And I called my family back in the States and said I made it. And then he took me to his home and had a water glass, not as big as this, not as big around, smaller, but it was way up high, and it was whiskey. He said, drink it. And I'm telling you, I didn't have any more concerns. Because I got pretty stupid drunk on that. And of course, he took me back home later on. And 2 days later...
Stress medication.
Yes, absolutely. And we needed it too, I'm telling you.
Yeah, we did.
And so, 2 days later, I was transferred out of the organization up to Chorley, which was a Repple-Depple, we call it, replacement depot. And I was there until, that finished on the 22nd day of June, the 24th I shipped out, and then on the 18th day of July, I shipped out from Chorley to some place, and I can't recall which one it was, some place in Scotland, caught the Queen Elizabeth again, and came back to the States. And going over, I've been told there was either 16,000 or 17,000 troops on board that ship. And you slept in a bunk for, I think it was 8 or 9 hours, and you had to clear out, and somebody else came in and occupied that same bunk the rest of the time. Well, going back, there were 80 of us on board that big ship, that's all. Now, of course, there was crew and perhaps some people in the hospital beds or something like that, but ambulatory guys, there were 80 of us. And on the way back, we zigzagged all the way across, and they tried to put all of us to some kind of worthwhile effort. And what we did, we got on iceberg watch, and we came across a couple of icebergs along the way, and I was on a 40 caliber, 40 millimeter, I just did, 40 millimeter cannon. And so we got to fire that. Of course, there was somebody on there who was a regular, who had that as his full-time job. But I got to help fire a 40 millimeter cannon at iceberg a couple of times, which was fun. Well, something I'd forgotten to tell you, before I left from the squadron, I had a Thompson submachine gun. And don't ask me why. I said, I want that Thompson submachine gun. So I stuck it in my bag, took it along with me, no inspection or anything in Charlie whatsoever. Got on board the Queen Elizabeth, and they said, now, if you got anything in here that's contraband, you should get rid of it, should turn it in. Well, I said, nah, nobody's checked it thus far, so I just hold on to it. Well, we docked at Halifax, Nova Scotia, and we were on the board overnight. So I got to thinking while we were docked in this harbor, you know, hey, you're stupid to get the Thompson submachine gun in the first place, and you better get rid of it. So what did I do? I pulled the Thompson submachine gun out of my bag, took it, tossed it overboard with some ammunition that I had. So it's probably still in the harbor of Halifax, Nova Scotia. We took a train then from Halifax down to someplace in Massachusetts. Now, I can't remember the name of it anymore.
Might have been Camp Miles Standish.
Camp Miles Standish, exactly. Camp Miles Standish. And there I got orders to take a train, go down to Atlanta, Georgia, and then a ticket to get me on over to Heflin, Alabama, where my family lived. And so I sent them a telegram, told them what time to meet me, and my family met me. And I was home for 30 days. Then they sent me down to Miami, Florida, down there for some rest and recuperation, as they call that, was for 30 days. And then sent me from Miami to Salt Lake City. And then I no sooner got to Salt Lake City, they turned me around, so go back home for 30 more days. So I had a good rest during that time. Well, at the end of that time, they assigned me to Dyersburg, Tennessee. And when I got there, they said, you know, go out, maintain a B-17. Well, I didn't like the idea of doing that, and I soon learned that the instructors at Dyersburg, very few of them had been in combat, so I made an appointment with the base commander and went up to see him and said, I just finished a tour of 25 missions, and I'd like to replace one of your inexperienced combat crew instructors and let them go overseas and get some experience. Well, he let me know in no uncertain terms that he was totally happy with his instructors, and when he got all finished with that, he said, and what did you do before you got on combat? And I said, well, I was in charge of the aircraft inspection crew for my squadron. He said, very well, you're on my B-17 inspection crew. So I went out, inspection crew, aircraft inspection crew. And one day I'm out there washing the tail of a B-17 with a long wand, you know, it's a long pipe with a brush on the end of it, washing the tail of a B-17. And I heard somebody say, Red, what in the GD hell, although it's a little more expressive than that, are you doing out here washing the tail of a B-17? I turned around, it was General Frank Armstrong, who had awarded me a medal at Thurlow sometime in January, I think it was, of '43. And so I said, ask the gentleman alongside you, because the base commander who had assigned me out there was the guy who was sitting alongside him. And sort of half angrily, General Armstrong said, "That's enough of that." And then he got very friendly. We talked for several minutes. And he saluted me, I saluted him, returned his salute, and he left and said, "Good luck to you." Well, shortly thereafter, and I don't know what shortly thereafter was, whether it was the same day or the next day, I got summoned to the base commander's office. And when now remember, I'd flown tail gunner, and something I didn't tell you, I'd flown some ball tread gunner for my total tour. Well, I would walk into his office and told him who I was, and he said, "Yes, I know," sort of half angrily, and said, "Sergeant, you're the engineer on my Standardization Board." And I said, "Colonel, my combat experience was tail gunner, ball tread gunner." He said, "Sergeant, you're the engineer on my Standardization Board." Well, he only had to say that about twice, and I got the drift of where the conversation was going. So I had a steep learning curve, but I did fairly well. In fact, I thought I did really well. So for the rest of that time, I was on the Standardization Board. Now, the Standardization Board is a group of people, experienced, who check the instructors to make sure all the instructors are trained properly up to snuff, and all of them train their crews the same way so that a person could go from one crew to the other with minimal problems. Well, the first thing that I did when I got that job was that I got a list of all the non-combat instructors, and I went down to personnel and made an agreement with them that any combat crew airman enlisted would come to me when they came back, and I would interview them to determine if I thought that they would be good instructors and had the proper experience. Well, since I was the engineer on the Standardization Board, and that's the top position, though I had never flown that position in combat, I was in charge of all those other positions on the stand board. Well, I got to interview every person, and I would shuffle off the people to the right place, to the right, for example, waist gunners, the ball tread gunner, the top tread gunner, the tail gunner, whatever it might be. And one by one, I replaced all those inexperienced, non-combat instructors one by one. And I can tell you, for quite some time there, I was the most disliked person on that base. It was rough for a while, but I got rid of them. I replaced them with people who had experience, and it was for the benefit of the crew, not for my ego or anything like that. Because, hey, when you're on a combat crew, you're part of a team, and you do anything that you have to do to make that team perform correctly. You don't let it down in any way whatsoever. So I was on the stand board from October 1943 till August of 1945, when the end of the war. Well, one of the nice things about the Standardization Board is that every now and then we'd get tired of flying with crews and instructors, and we'd say, let's go out and have some fun. Let's do something to see if the specifications really are true. For example, the B-17 is supposed to have a glide ratio of 17, it glides 17 feet for every loss of 1 foot in altitude. Well, we took a B-17 up with just average load of gasoline, 3 of us on board, took it up to about 18,000 feet, feathered off, started the APU in the back, auxiliary power unit, and started the APU, feathered all 4 engines, and check it to see what it would do. Now that's quite an experience to have a B-17, which weighs, I want to say it weighed 54,000 pounds or something like that, roughly 50,000 pounds with no power. But what we had, as I said, was the APU going, and the APU was there so that if the batteries failed, that you could always re-energize, restart the engine. We'd start the engine up and go. And there was a lot of other crazy things we did just to see if we could do them. For example, one thing that I did was we were sitting around talking one day, and I said, I think I could take a B-17 off and land it. And the captain in charge says, let's go find out. So what do? We go out, he puts me in the left seat, and taxiing at 17 was no problem whatsoever, because I'd done some of that. So I taxied out, lined up on the runway, took off, great takeoff, no problems whatsoever, flew around a bit, getting the feel of the plane, and then came into land. I was all over the sky. But my landing, no one touched me, but I landed and I bounced a couple of times, but no worse than some of the landings I made with experienced pilots, which made me feel 10 feet tall. Because I said, well, if ever I had to go back into combat, I could land a 17 if the pilot and the co-pilot were disabled. But this type of experience was just absolutely perfect. Then came the end of the war. And toward the end of the war, we knew it was ending. And they didn't have anything for us to really do. So there was one guy on the base, he was also a combat crew instructor, who had a radio controlled model airplane. So we went out and we flew that radio controlled model airplane. And we built some gliders and things of that type and flew them and just had a grand time. I played golf some. For example, I had never played golf before in my life, and I played golf a few times. Never played it again. When I left from there, on something like the last day of August of '43, that was the last time I put my hands on a golf club to take a swing with it. Now, of course, I've had my hands on some since then. And I went from Dyersburg, Tennessee, down to Fort McPherson, here in Atlanta. And I was discharged on the 2nd day of September of 1943 because I had enough points to get out, because I had been awarded DFC, 3 air medals with oak leaf cluster, air medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and you know, of course, the other things, good conduct and whatever those other medals are. I never got a scratch on it, never had any real problems other than my electrically heated suit, which we finally got. One time on the belly, the umbilical cord we called it, shorted out, and I got a nice blister on my belly. And then the other time in the ball turret, and you're sort of in the fetal position there and all crumpled up, I had some problems. And specifically, the problem was that the link chutes for the original ball turrets would frequently cause jams of the ammunition belt links. And so what we did was we just pulled the links out, let the link chutes out, let the links drop down into the ball turret. And of course, when they started building up, you picked them up one at a time and kept pushing them out as you got the opportunity. Well, they built up sort of high on me, and my suit shorted out in either the right groin or left groin, I don't remember which. And I couldn't get to the twist lock plug, which you set, just a little 5 or 6 inch bench you sat on down there. Couldn't get down to that because the links were jammed up against it. And as my suit got hotter and hotter, and so I got on the intercom and said, "Wow, I'm on fire, I'm on fire." And we were in a hot fight at that time, combat. And the pilot, very calmly and very nicely, said, "Shut up and keep shooting." And so what I got out of that was a nice blister, which caused a scar, which lasted for several years. I don't know whether it's right or left now, because I can't find the scar. But that was the only problem I had. Of course, every now and then your hands got very cold, your feet got very cold, but I was fortunate I never got frozen hands or feet, or either one like that. But when an interesting little side point is that people who flew combat over there, you couldn't miss them, because they had big circles on their cheeks because of the cold weather. And if someone out in London or wherever saw someone, they could say, "He's combat crew," because he had those circles on his face. Did you have that problem, Matt? It wasn't really a problem. It was an advantage.
Yeah, those oxygen masks, ice up and you get
Oh,
the
yeah.
mark. That's right. But you stayed in the Air Force after World War II, did you not?
Yes, well, over the holidays of 1944-45, year-end holidays, there were several of us at Dyersburg who had really severe cases of bumps. In fact, they notified our parents that we were not expected to live. And none of us kicked the bucket, though. All of us lived. But that caused me problems. And when I went back to Auburn in September of '43, I was having problems all the way through. Well, I got a letter from the Air Force said you can come back in. And so I went back in as an aircraft, an engine mechanic. And after I'd been in there for about a month, there was a notice pulled on the bulletin board wanting somebody to go to IBM Customer Engineering School, punch card equipment repair. Well, I wasn't interested because I didn't know what IBM punch cards were really. Well, the guy next to me, who slept in the bunk next to me, went down. They turned him down. And he came back and said, "Hey, this is right down your alley. Go see personnel," which I did. I got accepted as a candidate to go to IBM Customer Engineering School and took a competitive test and passed it. Went to IBM Customer Engineering School in Endicott, New York, and completed the same course of training that their regular mechanics do. And from there I was sent to Erning, Germany, and I was over there from July of '47 and left from there in July of '49 repairing IBM equipment, and had no troubles whatsoever. But I did have an interesting experience there. I got a phone call from the general's office and said his typewriter, electric typewriter, is not working correctly. So I went down and saw his secretary and told her, "I don't know anything about typewriters. I don't repair typewriters. I repair punch card equipment." She said, "Well, you got to go see the general." So I went in, saluted, told him my little story. He asked me one question. He said, "Are you my IBM customer engineer on this base?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Then you're my typewriter repairman." So he told me what it wasn't doing right. I picked it up, took it back to the shop, took the covers off of it. I'd never seen an electric typewriter before in my life that I can recall. Maybe, but I don't recall it. And so I took the cover off of it and started punching keys and seeing what happened. And finally I saw just exactly what he said happening. And I started looking for how do you take care of that. Well, it was a very simple adjustment to take care of it. So I made that adjustment. It worked perfectly. I cleaned it up nice, took it back down to the general, gave him a demonstration. And so what he did was didn't say anything to me at that point in time, but he called my squadron commander. Said, "I don't ever want to see him out on the parade field or doing anything military. Keep him in the shop where he belongs." So that was exactly what happened to me. And I didn't have to do any kind of military duties or anything like that other than because of my rank, I was a barracks chief. And of course I'd have to make sure people got up and got organized and out. But it was a great thing for me to do. And then in '49, I came back to the States, and I was assigned down in Fort Worth as an IBM customer engineer there. And I repaired equipment there, and for a year and a half or so. And then when I came up for separation from the service, I went down had 14 years, 1 month, and 20 days. I flunked the physical. Well, something I didn't tell you was that the IBM customer engineering manager in there was an Air Force colonel in reserve. And I went in and told him about this, and he said, "Red," he says, "go ahead and get your 20 years in." He said, "I'll pay you more when you have 20 years in than I'll pay you right now." So I took my discharge, wanted to get into computers, took my discharge and drove up to Washington, D.C., because I had a very good friend of mine up in D.C., a lieutenant colonel, and he said, come on up, take the competitive exam for a computer programmer. He said, I'm sure you'll pass. I did it, I passed, and so I wound up being a computer programmer on an IBM 705, and I believe that was the first one that the Air Force got. It was a huge computer, had, I'd say, hundreds of tubes. I don't know how many it had like that, and the tape drives were huge cabinets, about 30 inches wide and deep, and about 5 to 6 feet high, with the big reels of tape on it. And so I got on this computer, and then in 1958, I decided I wanted to go overseas. And so I volunteered to go overseas, and where did I go? I go right back to the same place I'd been before. That was back to Wiesbaden, Germany, or to Germany. And it was assigned to headquarters there at that point. And of course, I'd married in the interim, and my wife was with me. And by that time, I had advanced from just a computer programmer to a systems analysis and programming manager. So I had charge of all of the programmers in the organization. And I served there, and at that time I was a master sergeant. And shortly, let's see, then that was in October. I got there in June, I think it was, of '59. I was promoted to senior master sergeant, which is an E8. And then on the next round of promotions, I got promoted to E9. And then I retired on the 31st day of March of 1963 as a chief master sergeant, and was separated at that time from the service at Fort, can't recall where, some camp in Maryland. And I was separated from the service. And after that, I went to work for one of the major computer manufacturers, worked there for about a year and a half. Didn't like the way they were treating me, because they were making me travel every other week. And I was married, had a child, I wanted to be home with them. So I had a friend who worked in Washington, D.C., and he and I were in constant contact. He says, come up to Washington, and he says, you can be my assistant manager of a data processing installation up here. So I went up there, and about that time he left, and got a new guy. Well, shortly he started feeling that some of the money we were processing belonged to him, so he made off with about $25,000. And the manager of the computer installation came to me and says, would you like a personal services contract to be our manager of data processing? And he says that personal services contract will say we can't fire you for any reason other than if you steal money. So naturally I took it, got a nice promotion out of it, and I stayed there for about a year and a half, and then I did a systems analysis that indicated that one of our two computer installations, one in Washington, D.C., one in Philadelphia, should be closed. My boss told me, which one should we go to? I said, Philadelphia. But I will not go with you because I'm not going to move from here. He said, don't worry. He said, I'll keep you on the payroll for as long as it takes for you to find a job. I made an application at the Pentagon for a job, and the same people I'd worked for in the Pentagon previously saw my application and picked me up, and I was there until 1972, and I retired as a GS-15 in charge of a branch there. And then after I did that, that was in 1972, I moved up to northern Michigan and moved on to an old farm up there. We had an old house built in 1914 and began remodeling it. And after about a year of being in my wife's hair all the time, she went out and found me a job. She found me a job as a parapro, a teacher's aide, in electricity and electronics. Well, I went up to my first day as a parapro. I walked into the electricity shop, and the instructor was missing. So I handled the class all right, and after some time, it's still flashing. After some time, the instructor decided he didn't want to instruct anymore, and when he quit, I became the instructor, and I taught school in the Michigan school system for 12 years and retired again in the last day of January of 1986. After retiring, I really got involved in something that I've been doing for a number of years. That was genealogy, and which I still am involved in very heavily. So after over 13,000 letters, hundreds of phone calls, driving all the way across the U.S. a couple of times, numerous visits to courthouses and other sites, cemeteries and churches, I published a 675-page book on my family, and then that was in 1990, and then about 4 years ago I had to have it republished because other people wanted copies of it. And I'm still very heavily involved in genealogy. I'm working on a book on my mother's part of the family now because the first was on my father's part. And there's a second book on another part of my father's family, which I'm working on very diligently on both of them. Don't know if I'll ever get them finished or not, but certainly not the way I did the first one. The first one, I had a biographical sketch on people who are 20 or over or married. I did a biographical sketch on it was about 4,400 people, and it's a 675-page book. So these will be nothing more than just a recitation of born, when, where, parents, children, all that kind of information. And I'm very, very busy all the time, busily involved in the Georgia Chapter 8 of the Air Force Historical Society. In fact, I've been president, vice president, chairman of the board, editor of our newsletter, Tall Tales, and I'm very active also in my 306 bomb group. In fact, I just completed a reunion out in Oklahoma City, at which we only had 121 people there on that, but that's because we're getting older and fewer people can attend and there are fewer people to attend. But at that time I was elected president of the 306 bomb group, so for the coming year I'm still going to be very, very busy. Yeah, that's it.
Well, what a career you had, Mike.
Unless you have other questions?
We got about 7 more minutes.
Okay, ask questions.
You've been pretty much involved in Savannah with the museum.
Yes.
Also the 8th Air Force Museum. And they've come a long way, and they've got a long way to go.
Yes. But you know, when we all pass on, that museum down in Pooler is going to be the only thing that really says we came and went, you know, because that's what we're staking our future on, is the future of that museum. And the museum is a very interesting and nice museum. It has about 90,000 square feet. It was designed not as an airplane museum, as a people museum, to stress what the people did. And of course there are 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 4 airplanes there. One of them is a B-47, which is sitting out near the highway on pedestals. There is an F-102 or something like that, Thud they call it, which was used in the Korean War, is out front. They have
Got a MiG-17 they just picked up.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
And there's an F-4 down there from the Vietnam War.
Okay.
And inside, what is that, a PT-17?
PT-17, that's a twin-engine
No,
train.
it's a single-engine trainer.
Twin-wing trainer.
Yeah.
And they have a German ME 160.
163.
163.
Very rare.
Rocket propelled. 5 in there. It's on loan from the Smithsonian. And they have a P-51 being chased by an ME 109 hung from the ceiling. Now that's fiberglass, not the real McCoy. And the museum has lots of exhibits in there, and you know, like the bomb site and bombs, and they have the wing of a B-17 that went down on like December the 24th or something like that, at Battle of the Bulge, when they made that.
It was the Battle of the Bulge. That was December 24th, 1944.
Yeah, they have a wing of a plane that was shot down on that date. That within about the last 3 years was moved from Belgium to the museum. It's inside, a very interesting exhibit there, because it has the lip prints of a lady whose farm it fell on there.
That's right.
And they have a diorama there of an air base. It's somewhat modified from the actual base. I think it's Deanthorpe was the base that they have the diorama of. And they have airplanes on it, and they have hundreds of bicycles on it. I think the person who made the bicycles had to make 100, I said hundreds, but less than 200, but they have a lot of bicycles. And one thing they have on there that is not true to life, though, they didn't have any fire hydrants on our base at all, or that base, but they do have a little dog taking advantage of a fire hydrant there. You got to really look to find that, though. Now,
And they've just recently received the forward fuselage of a B-24 D model, which they proposed to make into a first-class exhibit. It has a nose on of a real airplane called the Fighting Sam. And you know, Mac, the thing that really grabs me when I go down there is a number of yellow school buses.
oh yes,
And these kids just eat that stuff up, particularly if they can find a guy like you that's been there and done it. They'll just keep you there forever. You've had that experience,
yes.
I know.
Oh yes, yes. I go down to Newnan High School at least twice a year and put on a presentation down there, and we have lots of interest with the younger people as they come in. But an interesting thing is that they have an ROTC class down there, and those ROTC students come into to our presentation, and they really eat it up. Now, some of the other students don't like it that much because they don't know anything about what the 8th Air Force did, or what a B-17 is, or what a B-24 was, or what a P-51 fighter.
Or P-47.
Yeah, any of those. And an interesting thing is, 2 years ago, I was given a Mae West. You know, that's the radio.
Oh, you're talking about the Gibson Girl.
Gibson Girl. Given a Gibson Girl by one of the people down there. He said that he had had it for years and didn't want it anymore, get rid of it, and gave me the Gibson Girl, and we took it down to the museum and gave it to them. But an interesting thing that happened the day that he gave it to us at Newnan High School, we had kids come up and crank like heck on it because, you know, you see the little light flashing, because when you had to make the light come on before it was transmitting properly. And we'd tell them, okay, when that light comes on, you have just sent a signal out to the Air Sea Rescue Service, and when they show up here with a helicopter, you're responsible for it, you know. And I've suggested that they make an interactive display with that, tie it down on a bench or something like that, so the kids can crank it.
Kids would love it if they make it then.
And have a light up on the wall someplace. Say, watch that light up there flash when you do this, you know. Show that it actually works.
You know, we were very fortunate, but there were 480 four-engine bombers that were ditched in the 8th Air Force, and that Gibson Girl probably saved many a fellow who would have drowned otherwise in the channel of the North Sea.
And the Gibson Girl was very curvaceous, and it put it between your legs, and you had a strap to hold him down tight together so it would be stable. And you had a crank on the top, and you cranked it. And they had two types of antennas on it, or the means of lifting two different types of lifting of an antenna. One of them was they had a helium balloon that you inflated and it raised it up. And the other one was they had a kite in there that you, if the helium didn't inflate properly or it ran out or whatever, you know, you could raise this antenna with a kite. And what it did was it broadcast a signal on 500 kc, if I remember correctly. And Air Sea Rescue could, through triangulation, could pinpoint you out there and find out where you were. And then the boats would come out, or airplanes would drop boats out there, or life rafts or whatever, to pick people up. Because in the North Sea, what they told us all the time is if you ditch out there and you were in the water for 20 minutes, you're there no more.
Yeah.
You've had it. Hypothermia will get you.
Yeah, the temperature was about just above freezing, as I recall, somewhere around 34, 35
Yeah,
degrees.
it was tough. And, you know, I thought we were going to have to ditch on my last mission, among other things. And I was sweating it out like crazy. And crews, a lot of crews who ditched just never made it because no one saw them ditch. The plane broke up on ditching. The life rafts wouldn't inflate properly, whatever. Of course, we had Mae Wests, which you could inflate with a little couple of carbon dioxide capsules. But if that didn't happen, you can blow it up. But as I said, 20 minutes, you're dead. So what good does it do? You just got to be out of the water. You can't be in the water at all. Your clothes can't get wet. You got to stay dry.
Well, Albert in McMahan, this is your life.